still morning, right?
It is
11:40.
morning. It is morning. Good morning, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are up for a treat today. And before we begin and before we do a bit of introduction, how many gamers do we have in the room? Yeah?
Whoa, okay.
How many are about to get into the gaming? No? Not anyone? But maybe after today's conversation, you will learn more about what are the opportunities, and we will challenge the stigmas actually about the gaming and what is that traditional
Exactly. I think everyone's
gamer.
gaming curious.
Yeah.
Yes.
I am super gaming curious, and I want to reveal that with Lucy for all of you guys. And Lucy, you're coming from investment, reallocating to Middle East from Canada, and then becoming a well-published author of a book about gaming?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Yeah, no, it's a very atypical path, and for my background, you know, I come from a banking finance background. So you probably like, well, what interest does she have in this space? And the whole point of the book was, I was like intellectually curious, like many people, because I knew that it was a growing sector, so big in fact, right, that it is actually more profitable than the movie and music industries combined. Mm-hmm. But also I had a son that was really into gaming, and we had access to a lot of international conferences and speakers on this topic. And so I kind of dived in. And it was at one of these conferences when I was listening to amazing global speakers talk about how this industry was changing education. So for instance, one of the things that stood out to me at the time was, you know, Japan as a country is very academically inclined, but they started a degree in gaming production and creation. And you would think that that would not take off, but in actuality, there was a wait list. So then I was like, okay, so if a country like that is also really forward-looking, there must be something for all of us to learn. And that's how the book came about. Mm-hmm. It isn't my book. What it is actually 38 topic experts from 5 continents, spanning all age ranges and ethnicities, that wrote each a chapter in the book. And so when you read the book, you're reading the content of the chapter, and then at the end, you're reading their bios. So the bios are amazing because you're like, wait a minute, how did this person that has a PhD in geography, how did she get tapped to become the head of world building for Microsoft? So the point is that it doesn't matter what background you come from, there's this sector is really tied to the future of work, and there's a place for everyone in this sector should you want to pursue that career path.
That is very interesting. Before we dive into understanding more about the opportunities and different sectors, especially in the education, sure, what would be your definition of nowadays the traditional gamer? Because when we say a gamer, it brings me back to the childhood. Either I see teenagers playing the game with a perhaps bag of chips,
yes,
or some more adults playing Pokemon Go.
Yes.
So that's for me a gamer.
So, okay, Juvi, I love that you brought up this question because I think that is still the traditional definition of what people think when they think of a gamer, right? That image. But in actuality, for instance, 48% of gamers are women. The average gamer is in their 30s. They own a house. They make over 100,000 US. It depends on the geography, obviously. But I also talk about old gamers, like some of the oldest gamers that I know. And they're considered gamers. There's a whole category called casual gamers, would be people like my parents. Like, for instance, do you sometimes maybe play Wordle on your phone?
I'm the worst.
Right? Yeah. So then you would be considered a casual gamer. So the definition's very broad now, and that is why the ROI on this industry is something that everyone has to take notice of.
So let's say even if I'm doing Duolingo while trying to learn Spanish, so I'm a gamer.
Exactly. They've gamified, right? Yeah. Learning a language, which makes it so much more fun and engaging, and yeah, your recall is so much better.
I love it, actually.
Yeah.
When you get the streak of 10 days straight hitting the language score, you're so happy. And I saw people doing in the conference after parties Duolingo, so we don't miss the strike. Talking about the industry itself of gaming, we talk in tech a lot about diversity, inclusion. You're yourself a big advocate, actually, of creating diverse tech environment, especially in the investment field. So how do you see that in the gaming industry?
Yeah, so it's so similar in terms of the diversity. For instance, a lot of emphasis is still placed on trying to get more women into the gaming space. But I just gave you the stats, right? That 48% of gamers are women. Now, what we still need to do is work better on getting women into the C-suite of gaming companies, whether they're studios or developers or creatives or coders or designers. It's just like every other industry. When you see more women at the top holding those C-suite roles, then that kind of trickles down into the actual types of games that are created. So I was very excited. Like for those who love Grand Theft Auto, I know we're still waiting for Grand Theft Auto 6, but there's going to be a female protagonist for the first time in what's traditionally thought of as a pretty male-dominated game.
Yeah, I was really surprised by all the stats that I think I found in one of the statistics from the gamers. Like 38% of the gamers are women.
Yeah.
Actually,
depending on the geography,
yeah.
yes, exactly.
Where do you see that? We've discussed before that Europe is the most mature ecosystem for the gaming industry. How about the other
Yes, I would love to talk about the geography that I'm very familiar with, and that's the Middle East, North Africa. We are investing heavily into this sector. So let me give you two examples. Well, we'll start with Saudi Arabia. Some of you might have heard, and I think the whole world heard last year, that Saudi held the first esports Olympics. And I don't know, does anyone know how big the pot was for the esports Olympics last year? It was 60 million US.
Okay.
That is huge. It was a record breaker. And I think this year it's going to be 70 million.
Oh, wow.
Okay? So that is an indication of how committed Saudi is to this sector. And they, as a country, they've invested and have committed to investing 30 billion into the gaming esports sector. And that aligns with the Saudi Vision 2030. Mm-hmm. Now let's go to a geography I'm really familiar with, and that's the United Arab Emirates. So we have something called the Dubai Program for Gaming 2033. So what do we hope to achieve in 2033? We want to be bringing 1 billion US into the economy every year. We want to create 30,000 jobs. And I think one thing we cannot forget about this sector is that there is a huge, not only ROI in terms of money back to investors and so forth, and we'll talk about this for brands later on, but also what are we trying to do? We're trying to create career pathways for our youth. And in MENA, we have a really high demographic of young people. And depending on the country, it could be as high as 60 or 70% of the population is under 30. So we obviously have to create engaging, amazing, sustainable pathways for youth.
Do you think then the age, the population and the age would be one of the factors why the governments and the also private sectors are so heavily investing in the gaming industry, or there are some other economic factors?
I think that is a huge driver. Jobs is a huge driver, but also diversification of our economies away from tourism. I mean, actually, tourism does bring in, gaming and esports does bring in tourism, but away from, say, property, away from oil, we are looking at everything to do with this sector, right? It also not just includes the esports, putting on esports tournaments, but creating peripherals, right? Making products that you use as a gamer, making actual content, and that's actually, I think, what I find the most exciting. I gave you the statistic a while ago that out of all the games in the world, only 1% are in the Arabic language. So that ability to localize games that are very popular into Arabic is huge. That is a huge focus of a lot of studios that are in MENA right now. That's just one statistic.
That's a huge opportunity even from this
Yes,
one
it is.
number.
And also what I love about the region, so whether there's a chapter in the book that talks about the gaming esports sector in India, there's one that talks about the esports gaming sector in Africa, and obviously a few about MENA and Asia. These countries are filled with history and lore. And so they are prime countries to come up with new gaming ideas that are culturally relevant, right, to the population, but also it passes on the culture in a fun way to people all around the world.
Talking about around the world, Lucy, you interviewed 38 contributors from the gaming industry from all over the world.
Yeah.
Can you share with us maybe some highlights that really shifted your perspective on the industry and its also economic power and how much impact we can create within the industry?
No, I love it because if I had time, I would give a shout out to all 38 authors, but I'll talk about a few. They're all amazing stories. But for instance, you know, we talk about the future, you know, as a parent, I'm going to put my parent hat on, and we want our kids to be gainfully employed, right? We're like, maybe we want them to be like a doctor or a lawyer. And there is a lawyer in the book, right? And she grew up being a gamer. But of course, she couldn't go to university as a gamer. Her parents wanted her to be a lawyer. She became a lawyer, and what does she do today? Her law firm, all it focuses on is, and she writes about this in her chapter, all her law firm does is they are an immigration law firm that brings gamers into the United States. And it's fabulous. So in her situation, she's pleased her parents, right? She's a lawyer, but she is still deeply embedded in the gaming ecosystem. So I love the fact that, again, you think of your traditional careers and you're like, oh, I don't see any relevance to me. That's an example, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you about another story. This other author, she comes from with a directing background, but she also worked for environmental agencies. She's Canadian, and growing up, her dad would take her out to walk in the forest, and she would collect leaves, acorns, so forth. And nowadays, unfortunately, our kids have something called nature deficit, where they're not getting out into nature enough. So what did she do? She created a fabulous game. It's called Tree Tap Adventures. And so what you're doing is you're building a forest in this game. But when you level up to the highest level, they have a tie-up with a sustainability and reforestation organization. So when you get to the highest level in the game, an actual tree is planted in real life. So I love that relevance or that crossover between gameplay and relevance to real world.
Mm-hmm. That is so interesting, and especially when you're mentioning now those interactive games that allows all of us to become part of the ecosystem. And what I notice, even though I don't really play games, but I'm engaged in the ecosystem, all the different brands coming so heavily into the marketing efforts. Yes. And for me, coming from the commercial marketing background, I see it as an untapped potential, but I wouldn't really know how to tap in the right way.
Okay.
What's your experience? Or
right. No. I love talking about, and to brands, about why they should be looking heavily into engaging in esports and the games in general. So there are endemic brands that advertise naturally in games, they're the ones that provide all the peripherals, you know, they're the HPs of the world or the Microsofts of the world, and you're like, okay, I understand why they're in games. But then there's the non-endemic brands, like Benefit Cosmetics. I'm going to use some that maybe people will be surprised about, LVMH, Gucci. You know, why are these brands? Why are these brands looking at games? How is that relevant to them? And so, and it might surprise you, or it made news that when Gucci did in Roblox, the Gucci Garden, one of their Gucci bags sold for more online, like the not real one, than the real one in real life. And it gives you an idea of the power, the spending power of gamers, right? Because I told you the demographic is more than, like, they're more wealthy than we realize, but also how immersive the experience is for someone when they game, and that's what differentiates a good game from a not good game, right? That they have to be all in. And so people are buying skins or they're buying outfits, and brands are looking at, how do I tap into aspirational desires, right? Maybe some of the gamers cannot right now afford a Gucci bag, but if you catch them early enough, they know your brand, right? They know your brand as they can level up in the real world in terms of spending power. So it's never too early to think about ways to engage in games.
Okay, it's starting very early from the engagement, planting the seeds, creating awareness, and completely different funnel from the branding perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, since we're in the tech conference, we have different stakeholders, investors, founders, corporates, governments, you name it.
Yeah.
Why people should pay attention to the gaming industry, and maybe we can start from the companies that and founders that are here listening.
Sure.
How can they actually integrate gaming into their workflow?
Yeah. No, I love this
Shifting
question.
a bit the perspective, because it seems like gaming is one thing is the game, but what we spoke before, that it's also such an applicable way to engage with employees and within an organization.
Yes, no, 100%. So, for instance, we have people with a lot of different hats in the room and virtually. So, for instance, I always say that if you're a brand holder, I already kind of touched upon that in our last question. If you're a brand holder, you should really look at ways to integrate your game or your brand into games. And I want to also point out that if you're a musician or an artist, I would argue that you probably have a higher chance of being discovered if you put your art or your music in video games. Because just the multiples of how many games are created at any given time is huge, right? If you are a C-suite executive, why should you care? There's probably tasks in your organization that can be more efficient. Everyone has areas that are not as efficient as they should be. So, for instance, if you're a sales organization, perhaps you want to try to get your sales numbers up. Maybe you're a consultancy, you want to make sure people complete their timesheets on time. Perhaps you're a supply chain you're a supply chain company, or you rely on a supply chain, but it's not running as efficiently as it should be. You should look at ways to gamify some of these processes in your company. Because guaranteed, if you gamify and make the incentives compelling, where you keep getting people coming back, say it's your sales force, you make it challenging, you make it like a game, then people are engaged. And you're going to find increased productivity where you're solving for a problem that's plagued the company for a while. Games can really change the receptiveness of your employees. So I always like that. Now let's talk about maybe investors.
Yeah.
I am putting on my investor hat. I talked about how big this industry is. And so games spans everything, right? It spans the technology part, where you're actually creating games. So you could invest in studios, development companies. Then there's also the business layer, right? Obviously, you need everything from marketing to PR to companies that put on esports events. All of that is required, right? Like any industry. And you also require the actual talent, like let's take esports, all the types of talent that's required in esports. Anyone from casters to people that do all the programming behind the scenes of an esports tournament, all the media partners. So there's so many business opportunities within these three layers. That is why, as an investor, you should be taking a look at what resonates with you, maybe what might be missing in your portfolio, what might match your portfolio, and take a look if there's a fit in the gaming space.
Okay, amazing. We have a lot of things covered in gaming, right? From employees' engagement to co-creation, mobile apps. So looking ahead, what are your top trends you're seeing right now in gaming, where you're really keeping your eyes on and don't want to miss?
Sure. I want to talk about a category that is called Games for Good. And so people don't realize that there's so many categories of games, right? So we know a lot about first-person shooter games, but there's a whole category of what I call ambient games, and that's games for mental health, right? So it could be forest bathing. It could be a game that's called Flower, where you're trying to change the wind direction to move petals around. So just even talking about it is calming, all right? But games for good, there's games, for instance, that teach about the whole Palestine-Israeli conflict and to make children understand why this is happening. There are ways to teach philanthropy through gaming. And there's contests. In New York, there's a Games for Good contest every year, and I'm sure there's many around the world, where we can actually teach really usable and frankly bring up individuals that have a holistic global mindset, right, when they're playing games. And it's not just gaming for the sake of gaming, but they're learning. And this is the power of using it in education also, where you're making it fun, they're having so much fun, and they're just taking in the learning without even realizing. So this Games for Good is an area I'm really bullish about, and thinking that there's going to be a lot more focus on that, on climate change, lots more games in that sector. And for instance, even agriculture, and farming, there's now close to 200 titles of games that are only on farming and agriculture.
Beautiful. Lucy, thank you so much for breaking the stigmas about the gaming industry and actually pioneering so many great things, and with your book, which is amazing. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us here today. And if you have more questions for Lucy, reach out during the app, and have a great rest of the sessions. Thank you.